Hi. I'm not totally sure how to do our intro because we are a blurry mix of a bunch of people right now, but we are several alters from Collective Mind, and we are doing a part 2 to the video that we made before about how your trauma is valid. And this one is specifically focusing on trauma stereotypes that we hear a lot of, things that people use to invalidate certain people's trauma or say that they can't have that kind of trauma for some reason, and why those stereotypes are not true at all, and therefore your trauma is still valid. So this is a video we've been working on planning out pretty much since soon after the first one went up, and we are probably missing some things. This isn't necessarily going to be a comprehensive list. We wanted to take a little bit of time to plan it to make sure that we wouldn't immediately kick ourselves after we finished filming it about a few things that we wish we would have added to the list. So hopefully that won't happen. But if it does and there's enough things on that list, we'll just make a part 3. So we also were not originally planning to film this while so blurry with so many people, but we have not been able to get just one person in the front since the day before yesterday, when we had a trauma holder front stuck for basically the whole day. So we feel like we are able to focus enough today, unlike yesterday, to actually film it despite still being really blurry. If in editing we determine that we didn't do a good enough job to feel good about uploading it, then you'll never see this unless it's in bloopers on Patreon, so we would just redo it then anyway. But we want to get a video up, and this is the next one that we wanted to do, and that we already had our thoughts the most together on. And we might have realistically ended up getting blurry for this video anyway, because a lot of alters in our system contributed to the list. So without further ado, I guess, this is an almost certainly incomplete list of some common trauma stereotypes that are BS, basically, and don't invalidate you. I do want to throw in there that this is, like, the nature of this video is going to reference things that could be triggering. We're not going into any kind of detail about anything at all, but we are going to very vaguely reference types of trauma and reference some of the things that people say to people who have experienced that type of trauma. So keep that in mind when watching this video, and I hope that it will be validating and empowering and not triggering. But I do want to make clear that in order to make this video, we have to reference those things. So I don't want that to be unexpected. So one of the things we see the most often that is shockingly common in our society is a form of victim blaming. And we want to make very, very clear in this video that unless you directly, explicitly asked for it, you weren't asking for it. So that applies to clothing or lack of clothing, makeup, hairstyle, lifestyle behaviors, like risky behaviors or whatever, drinking, drugs, nothing like that, nothing at all, except very directly asking for it is asking for it. And you can, like, the closest gray area I can even find in that is in an established relationship if you have decided explicitly that certain things that are less explicit can count as explicitly asking for it, but those would be discussed. You would determine those things in advance and agree to them, and you would still be able to back out of that at any point. So it doesn't matter where you go or what you look like or what you were doing or any of that. You are not responsible for what anyone else did in response to that. And you weren't asking for it unless you asked for it. In a similar vein, no form of abuse is in any way a compliment. So it's not a way to tell you they think you're attractive. It's not in some way valuing your company or valuing we're trying to be careful not to trigger ourselves as we do this. It's not a compliment, but on the flip side, there is also no such thing as being like not worth abusing, as being like too ugly or too whatever, that no one would want to do that to you. That's not a thing. And no version of that for any type of abuse is a thing. So you don't have to be grateful that someone would have wanted to do those things. Also related to consent, but if you couldn't say no, you didn't really consent. No matter what you agreed to or how directly or explicitly you agreed to it, if it was not safe for you to say no, if you even thought it wasn't safe for you to say no, and I mean really directly say no, then it was coerced, pressured. Even if that wasn't intentionally coming from anyone else who was involved in the situation, it wasn't really consent. And as we mentioned in our first part of this series, even if you consent to something, it can still traumatize you, and there are a lot of reasons people feel like they have to consent to something or feel like they can't withdraw consent or whatever. But even on top of that, consent isn't supposed to be deciding what your safest option is. It's not supposed to be minimizing damage. It should be enthusiastic, not pressured at all. And you should be able to change your mind at any point, literally any point, and you shouldn't have to be worried about what might happen if you do. There shouldn't be any consequences to saying no. Even like social consequences of then maybe they don't want to do something else with you later or anything like that. There shouldn't be any consequences. Because you don't owe anyone anything. Nothing you do or say or whatever forces someone to abuse you. There's no, you leave me no choice, none of that. It's never a valid option. And you are not responsible for the actions of people around you. So there's no, you made them too angry, whatever. None of that. You can't force someone to abuse you. Similarly, it's not your responsibility to prevent your own abuse. It's never your fault. It's only ever the abuser's fault. And secondarily, the society that allows abuse to go on and doesn't do enough about it. But it's never at all to any extent your fault. And it doesn't matter how many things you can think of after the fact that you maybe could have done differently that might have changed something. It doesn't matter. It wasn't your responsibility. And being able to think of things after the fact that you could have done that might have changed things does not make it your fault. Anyone of any age, gender, etc., can experience any type of abuse or trauma unless it's like specifically defined by being a part of a certain group. So like the only types of gray area are things like racism and things like that that are defined by being a part of a specific group. But beyond that, anyone can be abused or traumatized in any way. Anyone. Because, my next point, there are a lot of ways to have power over someone, and the most common ones, like physical, is one of the most common ones people think of. It's not by any means the only way to have power over someone. There is also things like political power, psychological, emotional power, social power, age and other hierarchy type things, respect, generally tradition or religion related, gaslighting and manipulation, because you can just convince someone that you have power over them, and then if they believe you, you have that power over them. There are also things where it can be a compounding factor of if you're used to people having power over you, your trauma responses could make you assume that new people also have that power over you. So particularly if you grew up having people treat you that way and not having anything you could do about it, it's easy to slip back into that mindset if people start treating you that same way as an adult, even if you have more power now. Children in particular have practically no power of any kind, especially over adults or compared to adults. There are ways that children can have some power relative to other children, but generally not relative to adults. And it doesn't matter if other people don't understand why you didn't have more power in a situation. You didn't. Because if you did, it wouldn't have happened. So some type of power was there. In a similar vein, the whole BS idea that if you were stronger, you wouldn't have been traumatized is not at all how any of it works. It's not about weakness. Trauma happens when the brain can't handle whatever is going on, like the cumulative effect of whatever is going on, and that's not something you have control over. There are things you can do, like, to minimize it, but in a lot of situations with power dynamics, like I was talking about, you don't have as much say over those things, like about how much of a, like, support net of people around you you have, or like the ability to process things as they happen, especially like professionally in therapy, things like that. But something that I see happen sometimes, or at least like being alluded to sometimes in trauma spaces, is comparing the types of events that traumatized you with the types of events that traumatized someone else, and implying that those things would have been like no big deal compared to what you went through for your trauma. And that's just not how that works, because if you compare it to, I think we said a version of this in part 1 too, but if you compare it to like fairly equivalent physical health issues, I wouldn't say that like you're weaker than me because I'm allergic to peanuts and you're allergic to, I don't know, strawberries. 'Cause like I can eat strawberries all day long and be fine, so why can't you? Like, that's just not how that works. So whatever traumatized you. And it's not about weakness, and it's not about you should have been stronger and just like pushed through it harder or whatever. You don't have control over how your brain reacts to something. And that was the thing that your brain decided it needed to do to get through the situation, which again, you had no control over. And there are like different severities of trauma symptoms, but generally speaking, those comparisons aren't very useful outside of trying to figure out how to handle treatment. So like socially speaking, it's not really useful because it essentially just works to invalidate other people. Like if I see someone say online that they are so badly traumatized because they have a nightmare about it once a month, it's not my place, and it's not kind, and it's very invalidating for me to like go into their comments and say, you think that's bad trauma? I have nightmares every night. Like there's no one benefits from that. If someone comes into my comments and like tells me what my symptoms are or something, I can correct them about my experience. But like those comparisons just don't help anybody. And if someone makes like extreme claims that symptoms that they described are the worst possible version of those types of symptoms or something, you can correct that type of thing too. But it shouldn't be in a like, I'm gonna one-up you kind of way, because any level of any of these symptoms is horrible. And then the last thing on my list is another pretty important one, which is that people very, very close to you can still not see signs of your trauma. But that doesn't mean it's not real, or that you're imagining it, or that it's not that serious, or anything like that. There are a lot of reasons why people might not see signs of your trauma. Our society is not really educated about it for the most part. A lot of signs of trauma can also look like other things. There's also a lot of denial where people would rather not consider the possibility that people close to them are traumatized. There's a lot of reasons. And if you're experiencing it, it's real. If you have comments or questions or more to add to our list, please feel free to do that in our comment section or on our Discord server, which is linked in the description, along with our Patreon and our Etsy shop, and I think a couple other things. And we do want to give a special thank you to our patrons. They help us out a lot. And we have some cool stuff over there if you want to go check it out. Or if you have ideas of other things we could put as perks on Patreon, we would love to hear those ideas. Also, please like the video if you liked it, and subscribe and ring the bell to make sure you don't miss any of our future videos, and we'll put links to other videos you might want to watch on the screen as well. We are working toward our next subscriber goal of 400 subscribers, so if you are not yet subscribed and like our videos, that would help us a lot. And every time we reach a subscriber goal, we do a compilation video, so I hope you'll help us get to our next goal. I think that's everything, so thanks for watching. Bye.